Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. We're going to be diving into a market outlook and very specifically on the dairy side of things. But before we do that, it wouldn't be a Dairy Signal without a little bit of trivia, fun fact, or today in history, if you will. And today it is National Pick Strawberries Day. And if you're in the upper portion states here like I am, it's still a little early for that. I suppose if you're probably in Florida, Georgia, etc., it makes perfect sense and time of year for them. But I figured it's nothing else a great way to enjoy some strawberries here this afternoon and get in that spring summer mood. Especially if you're anything like where I'm at, weather is less than ideal with a little bit of rain and cold mixed in. So maybe you can enjoy some strawberries and pretend a little bit that we're in some of those warmer months here. But I hope you get to enjoy a little bit of a treat here this afternoon with those strawberries. But we're going to be diving in here this afternoon and talking about our markets, specifically what has happened, what's going on, what is possibly yet to come. And joining us this afternoon is Leonard Polzin, who's a dairy markets and policy outreach specialist with UW Extension. And Leonard, it's good to have you back on. A lot has happened since we've seen you last, and I'm sure you'll go through some of that here. But before we dive into that, would you mind giving our audience a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Sure. As you mentioned, dairy economist at UW-Madison here. A dairy background myself, so we still farm. So I like to draw on that day-to-day experience, right, and try to incorporate some, tangible, meaningful things at the farm level too. When we're doing this, it's easy to sit behind the desk and stare at a screen and not really connect the dots through the entire supply chain, but hopefully you'll find that by the end of the presentation, at least you'll have something meaningful to think about and potentially use as a decision-making tool in your practice. So,
Well, thank you for being here today. And I have to say, if we have anybody who's watching live, you can definitely ask your questions throughout today's presentation here and discussion with Leonard. Really pick his brain, see what he's got to know about some of those tricky things that we're all dealing with in the dairy sector, and see what insight he can bring towards those, and maybe get you some answers or help you be able to prepare and plan ahead in what's a very interesting time in the dairy industry right now. But with all of that being said, Leonard, I'm going to let you get started.
perfect. When we do take a look at where the bulls and the bears are in the market right now, I mean, and this is the information that I've been gathering and pulling from and adding to, right? Even if you just kind of add them up, the bears seem to be more numerous than the bulls right now, that's for sure. But let's just take a look at where kind of some of our upside is coming from. In the immediate term, intermediate, short term, as this new processing demand or new processing does come online, they are going to demand more milk. So we'll kind of get into some of that and what that looks like here. But that, theoretically here should be price supportive. The other portion of that is beef prices are still high. So not only is that a bull for your balance sheet or your ability to pay bills, but also it is, kind of optimizing some decision making that we're seeing on the farm level in terms of inventory replacements, culling, things like this. If I was going to, weight them and see which ones are more heavy there, I would say that maybe some of these bears, at least in the first quarter, have been pulling some prices down more than the bulls. One thing I didn't include on the bull side is our exports. Our exports have really been carrying the day lately, as the international markets just don't have as much product. The prices have increased, and we've really been taking advantage of that. I think that'd be another good one to certainly look at and consider on that bull side. So on the bear side is the biggest one is policy. So policy. Normally we would say risk, but I would probably say uncertainty, right? Simply because there's a lot of things that we don't know that are happening and changing. So some of those are tariffs, the food assistance programs, labor and immigration, things like this. As we kind of take a look at the flip side of that processing capacity, immediately we'll demand more milk, but as we go along, we will see new product come on the market. So the big question that everybody's waiting to see is what does that mean as far as price transmission goes. Also on the bear side, we're getting increasingly efficient at producing milk all the time. We have more and more solids production per hundredweight continuously, right? So what the big takeaway from that means is that we're going to need less hundredweights, and also as we get more production per cow, generally speaking, over time, you need less cows as well to be able to produce the same amount of pounds of solids, of milk solids, which is really at the processing level what they use and need in order to make their end product. So I think there's some, we'll say, bearish pulls to that as well. And finally, the federal milk marketing order changes, particularly on the producer side here, it would be a bear as we take a look at, as soon as the first of next month here, looking at where some of the first phases or stages of implementation are going to be. The good news is that the markets have been performing better than we've expected to a lot of these changes. So while there is still a negative, especially here in the upper Midwest, a negative price pressure from these federal order changes or implementations, the overall impact is in price. Well, I should say the overall price level, where say at January, February of this year that we were thinking we would be at with some of these has raised, right? So while admittedly there is still some price pressure, it's generally less than what myself and other analysts have expected. This is just a quick look at where we're at for income over feed costs. So, and in say mid 2024, we really kind of crossed that threshold from 2023 being not so much of a great year, some really tight margins there to really coming back. And I mean, dairy is a cyclical industry. And when, as they say, high prices cure high prices and low prices cure low prices. And kind of the big fear that we've been looking at is that we have had good margins for some time now. And it continues to be the case into especially this first quarter of 2025. So that's the big thing that we're looking at and thinking about too is, when and or if does this switch and we do get to that orange line there, which is $9.50 level of income over feed cost. We use that simply because that's where the Dairy Margin Coverage Program uses as their top line trigger point for when that margin does fall, on that tier one level, that's where that payment is triggered. So that's the big question right now, and really kind of what we're looking at and thinking about. I wanted to start off with just some class 3 and class 4 futures. So this red line we'll start with the red line. That's the class 4 futures. So milk that's turned into butter. And you can see in June that we kind of have this kink. And so from May to June, and then after June, it starts coming back up. That is reflective of the federal milk marketing order reform first implementation period, where we'll see some of these make allowances and other changes coming through. What's interesting is that class 3, for the last few months, every time I made this graph, we saw the exact same thing in class 3, but they've kind of priced that into the market and other dynamics have kind of weighted out where that impact is. So the double-edged sword, right? In that, normally without that federal order reform implementation, class 3 would have been higher and class 4 would be higher, right? But as far as smoothing out of income on the milk check, on that class 3 side, we're not anticipating to see as much of a dip, at least based on these class 3 prices, is what earlier in the year we were anticipating. So I think first what we'll do is go through kind of this policy review, a bit of a roundup, if you will, and that way we can just kind of see how some of these policy changes have been influencing milk price, and that kind of leads us into some of the market dynamic discussions as well. So I think it is relevant that we talk about federal orders again, simply because a few reasons. One, changes like this come around once in a career historically. So if you are, find yourself thinking, man, it seems like we're hearing an awful lot about federal orders. That's why, right? Is because there are some big meaningful changes coming into place. And these don't happen, like I say, with a frequency that's very often. So The big things on this final decision that came out of USDA, the ones in the box that have that gray kind of behind them are the ones that have the largest impacts on price, at least here in the upper Midwest. So the first one of those is the increasing of make allowance for cheese, butter, NDM, and dry whey. So all these make allowances are used in that class 3 and class 4 pricing. And we're going to increase anywhere from 5 to 7 cents per pound across these product classes. One offsetting factor in this is that we are going to increase the butterfat retention factor in cheese. So what that means is that simply the number that's used in that calculation is going to increase. It's going to be higher, which means that as you do the math, you're essentially capturing more of the value of that butterfat that is used in that process. So a lot of that is stemmed from increases in processing efficiency, technology, things like this, in order to be better reflective of what the what the market is and what that actual transformation is from raw milk into a product. So the other one is increasing class 1 differentials. So this is that spatial component of milk marketing orders where you kind of are looking at how do you take milk from surplus areas such as the upper Midwest and then incentivize its movement to deficit areas, say the East, Southeast. Florida is always a good example, where there is not as much milk production, but there is a higher population. So this applies to that fluid portion, that gallon of milk that you say pour on your breakfast cereal in the morning. And then so every county in the US gets this class 1 differential that says, hey, what is the appropriate incentive in order to move milk, like I say, on a county level from these surplus to these deficit areas. So different parts of the US obviously are going to have different differential increases. But here in the US or in the US, in Wisconsin, we will see a slight bump. And then in other places, it will be more. So, since so much of our utilization does go to that class 3 space into making cheese, it's not like we're going to see the same increase as other milk marketing orders where they do have greater utilization in that fluid space. So while we'll have a positive effect, admittedly, it won't have as large a positive effect here in the upper Midwest as it will in other places in the US. So the other changes, we're just going to run through them really quickly here, are this change in standard milk composition. So protein percentages will increase, other solids percent will increase, non-fat solids will increase as well. Again, reflective of where we're at in production. We produce more and more solids all the time, so we're trying to capture that in the calculations in order to better reflect the marketplace. Remove cheese barrels from class 3 pricing. So we'll get into that in some future slides here, but just so you are aware that that is happening. And then reverting back to the higher of advanced 3 or class 4 skim milk price for that class 1 skim milk price. So again, this is right now we're at the average of, and we're going back to the higher of. So the hope is that will help with some negative PPDs and we'll say get back to a system that people did seem to have more comfort with, that's for sure. The other new thing is that there's a provision to adjust the class 1 pricing for extended shelf life milk. So hopefully that'll be make it easier to increase that place in the market to hopefully increase some demand there, some price risk management, and get some more product moving that way. So right here, this is what I wanted to get to on federal milk marketing orders is what it looks like on June 1st. So coming up very quickly, what is going to happen is that we're going to remove 500-pound barrel cheese from the USDA survey for class 3 pricing. The other thing, and this is where we're going to see most, especially here in the upper Midwest, where we're going to see most of our price impacts coming in, is this updating of make allowances. So that's manufacturer's make allowance. We won't go through it, but the different price per pounds are there. Butterfat recovery factor again is put in place. We're going to set that to 91%. Again, a lot of that is to help offset some of this manufacturing allowance, and again, reflective of the greater marketplace. Reinstatement of the higher of, like we just talked about, and this adjustment for extended shelf life. Big takeaways here. One, as we saw at the beginning, we saw that dip in class four prices historically throughout this whole year. We've seen that dip in class three prices too. So one, be aware of, on the lookout for that. We're on a little tight of a time frame to take advantage of any risk management strategies at this point, but at least be aware of that. The other is that this is a stepped in implementation. So those were June 1st changes. The next set of changes are on December 1st, right? So on December 1st, we would see some of these other component change values in coming in those calculations. So what does all
So
this mean?
Leonard, before we go on from that, a couple questions here real quick. Hopefully not too long, but who knows? I can get long-winded. But when we're talking about some of these reform details, especially when we're talking about make allowance or the butterfat recovery factor, some of those are easier to understand how they're going to impact price. The removal of the 500-pound barrel of cheddar cheese, what is that going to do? If I keep hearing it, but I don't necessarily understand what is it going to actually mean.
So the barrel cheese is an interesting one. So quick history lesson here is that barrels used to be like purely a market clearing mechanism, right? You had excess milk, you had excess solids, we have to put them into something. So let's put them into barrel cheese. And then we can have this, very commoditized product that we can then sell into the marketplace and then use as this market clearing mechanism, right? For excess milk. Over time, barrels have kind of become their own specific market, right? So where there used to be more of these, and I'm talking, I mean, all of this has happened over a very long period of time, right? So they've kind of developed or matured into their own very specific market. And with that, the market dynamics in that have changed in relation. This is the kind of general synopsis that's came out of USDA and all these discussions is that the way in which the barrel market operates seems to be different than the way in which we're accounting for it in the math of the federal orders, right? So so the reason for that is there's a certain percentage of utilization that's assumed for barrels. There's a certain percentage of utilization amount that's assumed for blocks, right? And as the actual utilization percentages change, the formula doesn't, right? So you can get weightings, too heavy or too light on, say, barrel cheese, for instance, right? So what they've decided is that, hey, this commodity product of barrel cheese maybe does not reflect how we're actually trying to get to some of these prices in our class three product, right? So then the thinking was, how do we adjust that? Like, do we adjust it? What do we do? And what they came up with was, hey, let's remove these barrels from this survey, the survey that calculates these class three prices. So the big discussion there, the reason I bring that up is that since it does kind of act like its own market now, then the question is, well, what happens if, what we've been experiencing in these markets ends up being different in the future compared to what it is now? And then what is the effect of not having that barrel price in that class three in the future, assuming the potential or possibility of these like fundamentally shifting dynamic markets, right? Big discussion, probably for another day. But when we kind of take a look at what these impacts are, the removing of the barrel cheese, we expect a modest impact on that class three component values. And we should have some slight less variability in pricing, right? So that's kind of where the impact is. So for make allowance proposed change, that's really where the biggest reduction is going to come from, decreasing those class and component prices, that's for sure. The second impact to the positive side would be those class one differentials. The change in melt composition will have a limited impact on component values or pay prices. The biggest change there is going to be in fat skim pricing orders. So Think of it like on the east, they're going to have some more meaningful impact than we will. Same thing with the higher of versus the average of. It'll be modest values overall, like when we look at a very long period of time. In the short term, I would expect that it would bump up some values in general here. So hopefully that answers your question. When we get to actually the numbers here, this is some work done by Chuck Nicholson that when we looked at class four component values, that's where we're seeing the 74-cent decrease. When we look at our class 3 price, our specifically our components were, our pool value will be about 91 cents lower. And this is the impact in make allowance change. So when we do take a look at where this class 1 differential comes in, we will see again these positive price impacts in there anywhere from say $1.06 to $1.70, something like this. So a lot of this is estimations based on utilization and things like this, but that's kind of where our biggest weighting of price decreases versus price supportive implementation on this. So hopefully that answered your question. I know some of these you could weight more towards the bottom or the top, depending on where the market dynamics are at the moment. But kind of all of them listed at that bottom of the page there. Removing barrels, going back to the IRA, adjustment for extended shelf life, fairly modest, especially in the upper Midwest. So hopefully that got to your question. Perfect. So the big takeaway here on federal orders. One, know that there is a first step implementation happening right now, and that on December 1st, that's when the solids composition change will be happening. So the big thing there is just to be aware of it. So that way, if you do need to make adjustments in your marketing plan or see something coming up and being like, well, why is there something different in December? That's why, right? All right, policy. We're going to talk a little bit about tariffs, immigration, food assistance, and some of the other very recent changes that have come about, such as the Grade A milk proficiency testing program, which is the USDA program that I've recently changed to. So when we talk about tariffs, the big thing to understand here is that a lot of our milk is exported. A lot of our milk solids are exported. So when we take a look at where global trade has been, this graph goes back to 2011, generally increasing over time. Our darker colored line there is China, and you can kind of see that when we look at how China has been buying versus the rest of the world, it has been dropping off, but the rest of the world has been increasing, right? So on the U.S. standpoint, we've been very fortunate for that while China has pulled away from some of their buying, the rest of the world has stepped up and increased their buying in some of the other countries, which hadn't been as prevalent homes for our product as they were. So this is just dairy export products and kind of where they are by destination. So our total export value is about $8.2 billion. And this is yearly basis kind of averaged out here. So our total volume is 2.65 metric tons. 3-year average is about $8.6 billion. We're at a compound average growth rate of about 4.6%. So something to think about is that when we do talk about growth in the dairy industry, vicariously, you have to talk about and think about what growth in the export markets look like, simply because we do export a sizable portion of what we produce. So when we take a look at where our destinations are for this product, as you can see by the graph, it's first Mexico, second Canada, third China, and then followed by somewhat of a distant fourth is Japan. This is just what that looks like in product volume and dollars. for 2023 to 2024. So you can see, I mean, Mexico and Canada really do, well, at least should dominate our purview, our view on what trade looks like for the United States, right? So it's really important that we do keep those trade relationships going and purchasing products simply because we do have that logistical edge by trading to our north and south than we do over the rest of the world. So the other portion of this is as we get to some of the other countries, not insignificant amounts, but definitely less than our major trading partners there. So I admittedly have not looked at these changes to tariffs since Friday. So we could have had something happen in between now and then, but my hope was to be as current as possible here. So just a quick roundup on where we are at with tariffs. So Mexico, we have no change. The policy that's in effect is still USMCA, and they have a 0% tariff on U.S. dairy products. So we'll put that in the good news column for U.S. dairy producers. Canada is no change. So we're still, so as of March 4th, there is no change in May. I should quantify that we have had a change overall, but no change this month. So right now there is a 25% regulatory or retaliatory tariff, but it does not include dairy products. We're still, Canada does have like protectionist policies simply because they do operate a quota system, right? So we still have very high over quota tariffs, but we're still operating under the trade agreements that we have previously established with them on our allotted quota limits. So we're still moving product. We're still, we'll say, status quo on that. We'll see in a second here, but over the years, Canada has kind of liberalized their export market and opened it up to us, or their import market, I guess you would say from their perspective, quite a bit over every single different policy iteration and trade agreement that we've entered into. So and as we go forward, the amount, especially for these non-tariff rate quotas, the amount that can enter, without this additional tariff amount, is expected and planned and in this agreement that it will continually increase over time. So from the U.S. perspective, we're still hoping and planning that we are going to get more product into the country to our north. So China on May 14th said that they would enter into a 90-day truce. So we have a 10% tariff now for 3 months. And the U.S. reduced our tariff on them from 145 to 30% for the same 90-day period. The big thing to watch out for is what happens on August 12th, because that's when the 90-day period ends. I'll show some literature in just a second that shows what trade agreements mean with China historically and how that does kind of influence their buying and potentially prices. And same with Canada on what we've seen on as we've adjusted these tariff rate quotas. South Korea, no change, 0% tariffs. The big one to watch out for is, not in a bad way, but just to be on the news front, is the European Union. On May 8th, they did launch what they call the consultation on possible retaliation on U.S. tariffs. So nothing applied so far. In a way, it's just saying that, hey, we're going to look into having a meeting to see what we want to do and if we do want to have tariffs on the U.S. That's meaningful more so right now, particularly than it had been historically, simply because from the dairy perspective, the EU has been low on production. So, which has really allowed us to move a lot more product into the international marketplace. While they're not a huge buyer of our product, tariffs would still matter, right? So we'll kind of wait and see. This is some of that literature that I was talking about that shows, what trade wars do to our volumes of traded products. So this was done by Chris Wolf, who's at Cornell. And back in July in 2018, China retaliated with tariffs after the U.S. imposed duties so we alleged unfair trade practices on them, and then in retaliation they said, well, we're gonna put a duty on whey exports. Those red lines show where this trade policy or this retaliation happened, right? And you can see pretty quickly, as soon as that happened, the amount of whey that we exported decreased quite a bit. And then once that retaliatory duty came off, the amount that we exported them increased quite a bit. The same sort of story for Canada here. So I'll do my best to describe it, especially because I know some folks here are listening in. We basically have a graph from 2019 to 2024, where we look at where the actual amount of product traded with the country just kind of generally increases over time. And then we kind of compare this to this dashed line which represents if there was no USMCA agreement, right? So, and across the time periods here where the trade agreement did take into effect, we can see with that dashed line, if there was no trade agreement, we would see quite a bit lower values in trade across the board, right? The big issue with Canada is the way that they allocate their non-tariff rate quotas. So where they've been allocating more of that, say 0% tariff allocation to this is the contention, right? Is that they're allocating more of that zero duty tariff rate quota to Canadian processing companies who have that incentive to not bring U.S. product into their country, right? Simply because that would depress their prices domestically. So that's where these disputes have come up, right? And that's where when people talk about U.S.-Canada relations, that's usually where that contention is in that dairy space, is how are we allocating this 0% tariff allotment evenly and according to the rules that were set in place and in good spirit with the agreement. So big takeaway here is that if we take a look at where our actual amount of trade value has been with them, it's quite a bit higher than where it would have been with no agreement, and quite a bit higher than if we had no dispute, right? If we would not have went through that dispute to try to get more quota allocated in the US's favor. These are both just small examples of why trade matters, right? And why policy matters is because it can make a very big difference in the amount of products that we are moving outside our country and who's buying it. So on that front, what are some of the possible impacts of these policy changes that we're seeing? In this blue box, we have trade policy, specifically tariffs. So this is modeled on just kind of a flat tariff rate, a flat retaliatory tariff rate, and then kind of extrapolated from that. So this is some work done by Dr. Chuck Nicholson here at Madison as well. So the green box is policy, or sorry, the red box is our tariffs, right? Our trade policy. That green box is immigration policy. And finally, that we'll call it purple looking box is our food and nutrition policy changes. Big takeaways here. So with retaliatory tariffs, if they were just in place, say at 25% across the board with our trading partners, this is where our price impacts would look like. So we have about a $1.90 decrease in all milk price. And when you take a look at what that would mean on class 3 price, it's actually quite a bit more than that. So that would be a $1.90 less than our baseline. So I like to use that change versus the absolute number because you have market dynamics that are coming in and instantaneously every second of the day changing market price, right? But big takeaway is that you could be anywhere from $1.20 to $1.90 lower in that all milk price per hundredweight with these retaliatory tariffs put in place. And again, we have to start somewhere to model and make assumptions. So that's, we do some hand waving and broad swoops of the pen. But big takeaway though is that definitely negative and definitely noticeable, right? So if those tariffs go into effect. And then the rest of the chart, we have decreases to net farm operating income. So this is on a average size, 250 cow dairy farm. We would see decrease in dollars per farm per year of anywhere from, we'll call it 27,000, 27,500 dollars per year, all the way up to $56,000 per year. So, and that's on that average size farm, as you kind of trace the math back. Uh, so that's on tariffs. The second is immigration policy. So on this, in order to kind of arrive at some of these estimations, we take into account loss of efficiency in the operation, because if you don't have people, you're producing less. Also, the cost in retraining, and also the cost of increased wages, simply because the demand for workers would be that much higher. So the amount that you'd have to pay them would have to reflect that, right? So the big takeaway here is that again, large negative number. So net farm operating income, per year, and this is what we call steady state equilibrium. So after all of the dust is settled, this is where we would be from our baseline scenario. It could cost farms of that size, of that, say, 250 cow dairy, approximately that $64,000 a year. So the other policy that was modeled through this was that food and nutrition assistance. So think of this as SNAP, WIC, these sorts of programs. So on this, if we just assume a 4% decrease in funding for those programs, we would see a decrease in all milk price of approximately 65 cents per hundredweight from the baseline. And which would kind of translate into this net farm operating income decrease of about $35,000 per year. Right now, today, the trade issues, disputes, while they are ongoing, it seems like, knock on wood, some of the major dust has kind of settled from that, especially for at least hopefully 90 days, while we're kind of in limbo with China, and the rest of the countries haven't decided to take any large major action. So immigration policy is still ongoing. I would say anecdotally at the moment, we have not seen these full effects of immigration policy, at least here in the upper Midwest, that have driven to these sorts of on-farm price changes yet, right? So that leads us to that food and nutrition assistance category. That one is still in debate. So as the Farm Bill comes up, and hopefully progress is being made on, we're in the early discussions on that at the moment. But as that happens, there are some policies, proposals, suggestions to decrease that SNAP assistance. So as that does happen, and this is just a 4% decrease in this model, this is what you could see there, right? So we're kind of at that, again, 65 cent per hundredweight decrease in all milk price. You can back out that math, right? A noticeable amount on the farm level. And this is per year over what this is a 4-year period, simply because that's a term of a presidency, right? So kind of steady state modeled after that point. Just 2 seconds here on what we call compensatory payments, but like we'll say direct payments or government payments, because in the past we've seen this where there's a policy, say there's a negative impact on producers, and then there's a government payment that's made in order to make up for those negative impacts, right? When I get asked questions about this is always what my answer is that I am not a professional political analyst, right? But when you do kind of take a look at where maybe focus has been, or where strong focuses on constituency have been, I think this kind of plays into a part of it. So this is all in billions of dollars. So our export value, like I said before, we're just over $8 billion per year. When we take a look at agriculture exports, we're at 173, right? So eight, quite a bit smaller than 173. When we take a look at all exports, we're at 3,054, which is quite a bit smaller than 173. So simply from this, constituency lens or, trying to decipher where focus might be, I want to propose the idea that if you're looking for direct payments in that dairy space, right, that number is so much smaller than the other incremental export categories that, being able to shift focus to make that a priority may be difficult. So far, it does seem like the administration is considering, we'll say, agriculture or farmers in general. So we'll see on that. But the reason I bring that up is I would hate for that to be a risk management strategy of just assuming that, oh, we'll get a payment, right? That's kind of the big takeaway here is I think maybe being active or proactive on some of these things, if they do look like they're coming down the line, might be better than assuming that there will be some sort of check, right? So I know Amber and I talked for just a second before we started about like what's really happening right now in this policy space, and there's a lot of very small incremental things that are coming out. So the one that kind of hit headlines a little earlier this year was the Meals on Wheels program. So they did extend funding for it. So it's still in effect. For a while there, it was kind of touch and go. But for the next budget cycle, they're looking at a 22% reduction in non-defense discretionary spending and 26% cut to the DHS budget. So if that happens, right, then this program would be affected. And same thing with these social service block grants. But just for kind of context, when you look at this program specifically in the greater purview of the dairy markets, it's a pretty small percent, but it's expenditures on dairy, and this is just my, we'll say, back of the envelope calculations based on the most recent data we can get. That's 60 to 70 million dollars that isn't spent on dairy, right? So when you kind of add up these programs, Meals on Wheels, looking at some of these other food assistance programs, farm or school lunch programs, things like that, right? We have, small percentages can add up over time. So from that policy approach, that's really what I would be cautioning people to look at and think about is, what do these small incremental changes mean collectively when we do look at policy change? This is a big one, not so on April 21st, the USDA came out and said that they're suspending the grade A milk proficiency testing program. So two big things here. The milk proficiency program was a quality assurance program. It was not it was a quality assurance program for those individuals that are doing the tests of dairy product. So that's important to remember that no actual testing changes or decrease in food safety has happened with this in the immediate term. But it's just this standardization process and we'll say, quality assurance bar that those testing labs that test milk have to pass in order to be able to continue testing milk. So the good news for us here in Wisconsin is that we worked very closely with USDA to implement this. So, we do have some of these backstops in place to be able to say bridge a gap in what is temporarily called a halt versus like an ending, right? The big policy implications on this are that in the immediate term, I wouldn't expect anything to really change. But it will be interesting to see if this shift from a federal program to a state program becomes the model for some of these policies and programs. And if that does happen, this might be a use case to see how well that shift works and happens. if that does continue to be a trend of policymakers, right? Because in the dairy space, at least, this seems to be that first example of taking a federal program and then putting it on that state level for implementation, enforcement, things like this. So milk is still safe. And like I say, this is more of that, I hate to use the word canary in the coal mine, but maybe first example of what it looks like to shift from a federal to a state level. Um, there's a bunch of other policy roundup things here, but the one big one that I want to touch on is right now. So this is as of May 15th. There was a House Ag Committee reconciliation that's going on. And in that, there is this proposal to have mandatory dairy plant processor cost of production surveys. This directly relates to make allowances in federal milk marketing orders. So that way you would have mandated information from the processor that you could then use in these policy discussions to say, hey, what does your actual cost of production look like? So that way, when we do update make allowances, we can make sure they're reflective of that cost, right? I think, as an economist, more information is always good. The one thing as you talk to your different organizations and groups, the one question I would have with this is, we get that as information, but how often do we want to then increase make allowances? Because we have seen in the past from this policy perspective that if you increase make allowances too frequently, it is easy for those to kind of keep incrementally increasing as well, right? So I don't know what that optimal time frame is, but I do know that that is certainly a point of contention on both sides of, hey, we don't want it to get too far out of line, but at the same time, over responsiveness may not be the best answer either. So I do think there is a happy medium, but I think there has to be a discussion within the entire dairy sector to figure out what that happy medium is. That's for sure. I'm going to skip ahead here just for the sake of time because I do want to get to some questions. But we talk about milk production and what that looks like here. I'm kind of starting to encourage folks not to really think about what cow numbers are doing, because we've had these, low heifer numbers for quite some time, but yet we're seeing cow numbers increase, right? Well, if you take a look at this map here, which shows where some of these more frequent or more recent plants are expected to be coming online, and then we take a look at where cow numbers are. Our cow numbers seem to be about in the same places across the US, but where's our biggest changes? Our biggest changes are happening in those states where that processing capacity is coming in, right? South Dakota, Kansas, Texas, Idaho. So what does this mean? In my view, this means that we're seeing quite a bit of what I would call supply chain coordination between that producer and the processor. So as that happens, right, some of these heifer inventory numbers don't really translate as closely to our potential to grow simply because you have some of these operations that are working directly with these processors that say, hey, at XYZ date, we're going to need this much milk and have these farms lined up and ready to produce that. So as we're kind of taking a look at where an indicator is of what does price maybe supposed to, or what sort of market information am I supposed to use to give some indicator of what price looks like? I would say this, and it's change in milk solids. It's simply because we're getting so much more efficient at producing milk solids all the time. Like last year, we saw 0.2% decrease in total milk production, but an increase in calculated milk solids at 1.4%. And we did all of this on less cows, right? So as we get more cows and more solids, we're going to fill that demand for new processing really quickly. For the sake of time, we'll kind of get past a few of these here, but two things to look at that have really kind of driven the market these days, and it's our exports. And so this is just global cheese price. we're that orange line on the bottom, which is the CME block. And you can see we're at quite a bit of a discount to the rest of the world. And that's really what's been moving a lot of our product and really supporting and clearing the markets of this class 3 space. Without that, on the top right is our cold storage stocks. Without these exports, we would really start to see stocks increase even more. And as I'm looking at indicators to see what is meaningful right now in this marketplace, the one that I kind of been gravitating towards is stocks. The reason for that is domestic demand has been okay, hanging in there to weak, right? That's been the story for quite some time. If you're looking at the international marketplace, demand has been great. And a lot of that's due because our prices have been so much lower and there's less milk production in EU and in other parts of the world. So as soon as our stocks start to rise in domestic stocks and cold storage, personally, I think that might be the place to look as that leading indicator of when or if some of these price pressures are going to come into that marketplace. And same thing on butter. That large blue line is 2025 exports, and you can see we are drastically above 2024 and 2023. Not unrealistic that we could set a record for butter exports again. The last time we did set a butter export record, by the way, we had excellent farm level prices, and that's why, is because our butter exports were so great that year. So hopefully a price pressure event, but as the EU does and should come back online with production, we could easily see some of these prices come back and adjust as well. So here's global butter prices. We're that orange line selling at a pretty decent discount to the rest of the world as well. And again, butter exports were, on track for that 2022. And that 2022 was that record year then when we saw really good farm level prices. And a lot of that was because the rest of the world didn't have availability of product. We exported a lot, and the values were high and our volumes were high. So when P and Q are both high and you multiply them together, that ends up being pretty good on that farm level. The big thing, just two more things here quick, and then we'll take some questions. The big thing to watch out for is this food away from home right now. We've seen pizza sales that are decreasing. Starbucks has had kind of a hard go of it here for same store sales. Same thing with McDonald's. That's been all over the news. It's been quite some time since McDonald's has seen decreases like they have recently in sales. Taco Bell is still hanging in there. They're still moving cheese, so that's good. But I just pulled up some numbers this morning here, and our food away from home, about, depending on how you want to calculate it and look at it, we're at 30 to 43% of cheese is eaten away from home, and approximately 18% of our total dairy consumption. Admittedly, this range it's a range, and it's we don't have like monthly data on this, but nonetheless, as we start to see food away from home decrease, we do see price pressures coming in. So I do want to get to one more here on just mapping out what milk prices look like and how we get to that farm level. And you can see I've highlighted a lot of orange here, or that yellow, if you will. So if we kind of go this red, yellow, green, right? I think right now we really want to watch inventories. We want to watch that butter production and cheese production, because as soon as we start to build stocks, either through not as much exports or less domestically consumed, I think that's where we're going to have some of these pressures come in. So right now, exports rule the day, and as long as we don't end up holding the chair when the music stops, we'll be fine. But hopefully that kind of paints somewhat of a picture where the dairy markets are here. We're going to see hopefully some stronger class 4 prices in the future, I think from multitude of reasons, but exports have certainly been helping in that. And some class 3 pressures. I think some of that is going to be because of greater utilization. Some is going to be for new processing, some federal order changes, things like this. Yeah, right now we're, um, you know, thanks to lower feed prices, when you do look at dairy margin coverage, we do have that higher positive level of income over feed costs. But I do know that, if your milk check is 17, $18 per hundredweight, that's not too far off from break even on a lot of farms on the farm level as well. So right now I'm kind of looking at $19 for the rest of the year on an average. And I do think there still are some price pressures out there that I would encourage folks to be um, aware of. I know when you do come off your highs, it's hard to make those marketing and risk management decisions, right? Kind of when you're in the middle of a range. Even if there's kind of thinking, say SNAP, for example, if we do get a 4% reduction in food assistance programs and we do see a 60 plus cent decrease um, in all milk price, what does that translate to for your farm? And that's just one policy example, right? Is there an offsetting risk management? Could you buy a put for XYZ price? Where if you did see that, you would still, come out all right from it. Now, put is for a very specific period of time. Maybe you'd want to look at, something that spans a greater period of time, but just kind of food for thought there.
Well, Leonard, I have to say we've got a couple that questions that did come in, and I want to get to them here if you have a second for them.
Certainly.
Okay. Very interesting. It's one of those things where we know right now, especially in the dairy markets, it feels like we're doing good, but we know that nothing ever stays the same. Unfortunately, at least in this moment, it feels like that. And there's a lot of areas in which it can change drastically and in a hurry, as we know. But one of the questions that we have here from a listener was if we were to have a downward trend in income over feed costs, when would you expect that to happen? And that is a crystal ball question, but from your experience.
So we know that prices are cyclical. Let's see here. One second. So we know that prices are cyclical and they happen we'll go to this one. Within, actually, I might be super bold here and pull up the slide. I have one hidden here that will answer that. Well, it won't answer that question, but it'll provide some insights. So we know that prices are cyclical and that we and part of that is because, like I said at the beginning, high prices cure high prices, and low prices cure low prices. So we see this, this change over time in response. So this is a little bit outdated, but we do see that price cycles here do have an average length of about 36 months. And we're kind of at that beginning trend of a downward price cycle. I always caution people, do you want to take this to your lender and say, hey, we're at the bottom of a price cycle. It's guaranteed. Give me all the money you can because it's nothing but sunshine and rainbows from here on out. Absolutely not. This is observation over a period of time, right? That we see that these price cycles happen. So some of the math on that is the mean length or the average time these cycles last is about 3 years or 37 months. But they range from 23 months, sorry, to about 45. The big thing here is the amplitude. So from peak to trough, we're about $9-ish per hundredweight. The lowest we've seen is about 960, and the max is about $11 per hundredweight. So while that doesn't answer your question specifically, what we have seen are these price cycles of about 3 years. So we'll call it 2 to 3 years. So if we're thinking that, hey, we're at the start of one already and we're kind of coming down based on this, right? Then, that would mean we have, some period of time that we're looking towards would kind of match or map into this price cycle theory. So, to say hard and definitive, like, this is where we're on the cycle. This is exactly what's going to happen. Nobody knows, right? This is, based on what we've seen over this period of time. We do know that prices are cyclical, generally speaking, right? But that does give you hopefully some insight towards an answer.
Well, I think it helps put things in perspective. It gives you a visual or an idea of, okay, where are we at in the system that has potential to be what's, traditionally been done. So next question here reads then, when looking at CME prices, are the June 1 and December 1 FMMO changes already reflected in these prices?
Yes. Yep.
Simple,
They're
straight
already,
to the point.
already priced in. Yep. So even before they came out, there was some slight evidence, anecdotally at least, that even the anticipation of was priced in a bit. And then when the announcement came, they've been getting, we'll say, more. They were priced in right away, but like as time goes on, more accurately priced in as we go, right? So already priced in. Yep.
Okay. And one last question here, especially as we think about all the discussion points that we went through here this afternoon, because there's a lot to be taking in. I mean, if somebody was watching this and you had to break it down into one or two key takeaway points that you want producers to be thinking about, or maybe even actively doing after today, what would they be?
So this calendar year so far seems to be that headline news matters, and it has been translating into price movements more so than we've seen historically. I will caveat that by saying the market does seem to be getting a little bit used to it, and we're not seeing the reactions that, as we get these more and more big announcements, we don't see these fluctuations as much. So, actual numbers, actual things that come in are going to move the markets simply because we're not, as we get more and more, we'll say dull or to this headline news effect, those are going to be the things that really move the markets. But this year, particularly, partially because of the large amount of things that's happening, but also the we'll call it the amplitude, but the impact, the sheer volume, dollar wise of what's being proposed on things is moving markets as well. So I think there's more policy risk at the moment than what we've seen historically. So be aware of that. As I know that's very easy to say and very hard to do. But if you're able to cut through the noise and say, all right, what exactly is being implemented, what is happening, and then being able to try to make decisions off of that is probably a good thing. The other big takeaway is a lot of the indicators that, at least just in my opinion, that normally we've been using to watch these markets, cow numbers, productions, cold storage reports, right? The ones that matter right now, to my opinion, aren't cow numbers. It's production of solids, right? It's exports, and exports are going to tell you that's your first kind of primary indicator of how things are going right now. Because as soon as those stop, it's going to have this backup effect through the rest of the supply chain. So as soon as exports stop, then cold storage inventories are going to grow. Once those two things happen, well, you don't need both of them to happen at once, but like once those things start happening, that's where we're going to start to see price pressure, right? So for me, that's what I'm watching, and even for our farm, making decisions on is what are export numbers coming in at, and what are stocks looking like. Normally, historically, like I said, you look at cow numbers, you look at production per cow, you look at all these things. Those do not seem to be as bearing large impacts on market prices and therefore farm level prices as what some of these other things seem to be doing. So policy, exports, stocks.
Well, Leonard, I have to say those are some big things to be keeping an eye on, but I appreciate you breaking them down and going through why they matter and what it could have impact wise on the farm level. So thank you so much for your time here this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to have you on with us once again.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you to those who joined us and watched live, as well as to those who are joining us after the fact. If you're ever wondering what is going on in the world of professional dairy producers, head over to our website at pdpw.org to find out. But for now, thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you here tomorrow on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.